Folks are rolling in really quickly. Just want to kick this thing off. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us for today's live webinar with Our Hometown. My name is Matt Larson. I'm the president and CEO of Our Hometown, and I'll be the host for today's discussion. This event is part of a monthly educational series that we're hosting in partnership with Today in News Tech and a wide range of state and national press associations where I'm sure most of you heard about this event. So today we will be interviewing the lawyers and the lead plaintiff behind the antitrust lawsuit against Google and Facebook. Let me first of all introduce Lee Wolverton, the Vice President of News and Executive Editor at HD Media. Thank you very much for joining us, Lee.
Thank you for having me.
Also, we're joined by two partners from the law firms behind the suit. We have Paul Farrell of Farrell and Fuller LLC and Bob Fitzsimmons of the Fitzsimmons Law Firm. Paul and Bob, welcome to the webinar, and thank you so much for taking the time to do this.
Thanks, Matt.
So let's kick it off right away. Paul has come with a presentation that I'd love for you all to hear on the history behind antitrust and the case. So, Paul, if you want to go ahead and share your screen and take it from there.
Thank you, Matt, for inviting Bob and I to this platform along with Lee. And we have the pleasure of representing a bunch of newspapers and publishers in the antitrust case against Google. And so what we wanted to do is we wanted to kind of give you a big, broad overview of what this case is, why we brought it, what its purpose is, and then to answer any of your questions. And so we'll start with, this is my journalism from a high school journalism, the 5 questions to ask. So I'm going to attempt to identify the who, what, when, where, and why of what we're doing. All right. So this is who. The first case that we filed was on behalf of the Charleston Gazette-Mail. And that's who what Lee's doing for a living these days is he's running this esteemed newspaper. The reason I bring this up is because the background between Bob and myself and this newspaper really dates back to the headlines that you read here. And I don't want to get into a long, boring story, but it's important for context when we tell these stories. The Sunday Gazette-Mail broke this story in December of 2016. And it was based upon the Arcos data of opioid pills sold into West Virginia. I read this newspaper, Lee, at my father's breakfast table on Sunday morning, and my mother asked me what I was going to do about it. Arising out of this newspaper headline, I filed the first opioid cases in the country, which led to the national opioid litigation that I have been appointed co-lead for. And in fact, Bob Fitzsimmons and I tried the first and only opioid case in Charleston, West Virginia last summer, and we're waiting on the verdict. You'll probably read in newspapers around the country on Friday that there's a national $26 billion settlement in the works. Nonetheless, this local newspaper broke this story and won a Pulitzer Prize for it in 2017. Now let's freeze frame that for a second and let's back up and provide a little more context. In 2005 and 2006, there were 2 newspapers in Charleston, West Virginia. One with an editorial page that leaned left and one with an editorial page that leaned right. But something happened in the late 2000s that really began to impact the bottom line, and the advertising dollars began to shrink. And these 2 newspapers entered into a joint operating agreement to try to share overhead and expenses of publication to survive. And guess what happened? The federal government came in and filed an antitrust suit, broke up the joint operating agreement, and forced both papers into bankruptcy. Some irony in all this story that will come around. This is the first complaint you're seeing on behalf of a newspaper in the United States joining the antitrust litigation. You can see it was filed January 29th, 2021. in federal court in the Southern District of West Virginia against Google and Facebook. Since that time, this has been the rallying flag for newspapers and publishers across the country. Bob will talk about that a little bit more in a bit. These are the 4 law firms that I have hand selected to build this team. Between my firm, Bob Fitzsimmons, and then the Robbins Geller and Herman Jones firm, this represents, in my opinion, the dream team, the pinnacle of legal representation for antitrust and trial work in the United States. So now a little history. To understand the Sherman, John Sherman was this guy from Ohio, and I found this cartoon at the bottom of the thing. This is a political cartoon from the late 1880s. And essentially what happened is this, is that after the Civil War, when Reconstruction was beginning, the country found out that most business industries were held by very few hands. And as you can see from it, the legislature is trying to deal with the steel beam trust or the copper trust. All of the resources were concentrated in a particular industry sector in one person's hands, and that wasn't very good for business. So let's just take the game of Monopoly, right? Everybody has played Monopoly. And if you'll remember, in Monopoly, what we do is we all start out on even grounds. The bank gives us all an even amount of money. The definition of monopoly in the Sherman Act is real simple. It's simply put into the original rules of monopoly published in 1935. The object of the game Monopoly is for everybody to start off with such good advantage. And then the end of the game is when one person forces all of the other players out of the game. A player who goes bankrupt must pick up his piece and go home. That's what monopolies are, is that when you win the game of Monopoly, one person has all the property and money, everybody else goes home. And so then what do? The game is over and you start again. That's what happened in 1911 with Standard Oil. Standard Oil is the first case the United States Supreme Court considered antitrust. And it's very simple. Did Standard Oil hold a monopoly? And if so, they're going to break it apart. This is the expansion and consolidation of marketplaces in the United States. Standard Oil initially was broken up into several subparts, and then those subparts began to merge back. Eventually, what you'll see is a concentration again as the game of Monopoly proceeds and other players go bankrupt and leave until we start all over. You'll see the same thing with AT&T. When it was broken up in 1984, you'll see that there were a whole bunch of other people that started out on even playing grounds until the game proceeded. And now what we're seeing is, again, a concentration of the market. So the reason that we started this process is really triggered by the congressional investigation. In October of 2020, there was a 400-page report published by Congress who spent months and months and months studying digital advertising monopoly. And when you look at the report, it announces that Facebook and Google have unassailable positions, that there are no alternative places. These two companies have dominated digital advertising to a greater extent than Standard Oil and a greater extent than Ma Bell. When you look at the testimony of it, you see the News Media Alliance has had a very active role. And when you look at the table of contents from this congressional hearing, there is one particular class that has been impacted of note in this report, and that is the free and diverse press. There are some 15 pages of congressional testimony and findings about the impact of Google and Facebook's monopoly on newspapers. As a result, the US federal government and 48 attorney generals have all instituted antitrust actions against Google and Facebook. The main purpose of this, of Section 1 of the Sherman Act, is to identify whether or not there's a restraint of trade. So, by way of example, I want everybody to think about this. If you wanted to buy Google stock, you wouldn't call Google. If Google wanted to sell you stock, they wouldn't call you. You would go through a broker, and Google would go through a broker, and you would meet in the electronic marketplace called the New York Stock Exchange. The same thing happens now in digital advertising. When I was in high school, I would go to the local hot dog stand and say, do you want to run an advertisement in my school newspaper? And then they would give me a markup and I would put it in the paper. That's not how it works anymore. The way it works now is that if you want advertising in your newspaper, you have to go to a digital broker. If someone wants to place advertising, they have to go through a broker. Both of those brokers are run by Google. Those two brokers will meet in the middle in an ad exchange. The ad exchange is run by Google. So what's happening is that we have advertisers and we have publishers, and they have Google agents and brokers that are meeting in Google's playground and playing by Google's rules. That in and of itself is a restraint of trade that will likely result in the antitrust action breaking up Google's digital monopoly. It gets even better though. What happened is that just like the NASDAQ competes with the New York Stock Exchange, Facebook fell behind Google. And Facebook decided to open up their own ad exchange to compete with Google's playground. Well, Google didn't want the competition. So Google went to Facebook and they cut a deal. This would be like the New York Stock Exchange going to NASDAQ when the NASDAQ was just starting and saying, look, if you'll forego competing with us, we will cut you a sweetheart deal to make you a priority for digital advertising over everybody except Google. And they were so arrogant as to call internally this agreement in writing Jedi Blue. So we now have the documents of Jedi Blue. And for those of you that don't know, this is a blue Jedi. Jedi Blue contract actually adds 2 pages of what Google and Facebook agree to do together if they ever get sued by antitrust. Now, why? This is from the congressional report. This is new newspaper advertised spending from 2000 to 2022 in dollars spent. This is the trend that everybody began seeing in 2006, 7, 8, 9. This is the transition point. This is Bill Gates's the internet tidal wave. This is the effect of the consolidation of the market. This is the page circulation of daily newspapers in the United States from 85 to 2018. While there have been cyclical trends in the United States over time, there has never been such a drop in circulation in the history of newspapers in our country. This is from the University of North Carolina School of Journalism. If any of you haven't seen this report, they've been monitoring the decline of local newspapers across the country in an interactive map called a news desert. As you can see, not only are there places with no newspapers, you'll see the massive increase in the yellow territory, where now there's only one newspaper serving. This is Facebook's global revenue as of 2020. It is inverse to the experience of the newspapers. And this is Google's advertising revenue. From 03 to 2019, it's now $174 billion. So while each of the newspapers have attempted to transition from print to digital, and as their online subscriptions went up, their revenue went down. And that's because nobody can compete with Google for the digital dollars. So what we're asking for in this lawsuit, the Sherman Antitrust Act says that if you have a monopoly or you attempt to enter into an agreement with another competitor to monopolize, the harm that is suffered by those like the newspapers and publishers is the difference between where we should have been and where we are. And then we get what's called treble damages, where you take your economic losses, you multiply them by 3, and on top of that, you have to pay their lawyers as well. So what that means in general is this, is that the law firms that I have brought together are willing to underwrite the risk. We have the manpower and the means to prosecute the case. If we lose, you owe us nothing. If we win, the bad guys pay your lawyer bills. Now, aside from all of that, there is something even greater that we're pursuing. If you think about the aftermath of what happened with Standard Oil, think about the aftermath of what happened when Ma Bell gets broken. The marketplace is being reset in both of those industries. If by chance the Federal Trade Commission, the Department of Justice, the Attorney Generals, us, if we prevail, we will then have an opportunity to reset the marketplace for digital newspapers. We're not interested in doing what Australia did or what the European Union is attempting, which is to simply have them throw scraps from the table to allow the newspaper industry to survive. What we're looking for is to take Google News away from Google, to take the aggregators away from Apple, take it away from Microsoft, and to create our own self-sufficient standing digital newspaper stand that we control, that the advertising dollars goes to us, that we define the marketplace for ideas moving forward. And if we do that, when we do that, the newspapers won't just be able to survive in today's economy. They'll once again begin to thrive. And what we can see is a true free and diverse press in communities across the country. Because without local newspapers, the opioid epidemic would have raged on for at least another decade before anybody figured out what was going on. So I am a firm believer in not only trying to recoup the past, but build a future moving forward. And those that have joined our cause will have a seat at the table when we redefine the marketplace. So in general, that's my pitch. That's the update.
Wow. Fantastic overview. Thank you so much, Paul. That was incredibly enlightening. I want to just, first of all, make sure everyone knows that we're taking questions throughout this. So please locate the chat box or the Q&A, and please start putting any questions you have in there. I think we should keep it focused on you guys, maybe pivot to Lee just for a moment here to hear his perspective, and then we'll talk to Bob. as a VP of a local news publishing company, can you talk to us a little bit about your experience and the impact that Google and Facebook have had on your business and what led you to pursue this case?
Well, I'm going to certainly leave the legal particulars to Paul and Bob, but what I can share with you, I'm an editor, so I deal in facts, and Paul covered the second half of the facts that I look at that I think are especially fascinating and we should all be looking at. From 1962 to 2005, newspaper industry advertising revenues increased from roughly 3.7 billion to roughly 49.4 billion. So that is a more than 12-fold increase over a 44-year period. In 39 of those 44 years, annual revenues increased year over year. You would be hard-pressed to find any industry that could claim that kind of a record of success for its primary source of income over that length of time. So that really explains how we got where we are in terms of how we operate, how we got where we were when this happened. So then from 2005, the period that you saw illustrated in Paul's PowerPoint, 2005 to 2020, newspaper industry advertising revenues fell from 49.4 billion to 9.6 billion. Fell year over year, 15 of those 16 years. So that's a breathtaking collapse. The last 9 consecutive years, our revenues have fallen and at increased rates. So we've not had a year over the last 9 years in which we've had less than $1.4 billion in revenue losses year over year. So if that particular trend held up, if we continued to lose at least $1.4 billion in advertising revenues year over year, then within 5 years, we'd be at zero. So the end for our business is in sight if we don't do something. There are a lot of people, I think, who have placed what I believe to be false hope in circulation revenues. Circulation revenues have inched up. That's all they've done, is inch up. So we're basically fighting what I believe is a losing battle. And of course, over that same period of time, and Paul covered some of this, you go back to 2005. In 2005, of course, Facebook was a fledgling operation. Google was still relatively new, a few years old. Their revenues were $6 billion. We have numbers now in from 2020. Google alone had 184 or 183 billion dollars in revenues in 2020 and 147 billion in advertising revenues, almost all of that US advertising revenues. So those two companies combined have more than $200 billion in advertising revenue, while we're driven down to 9.6 billion. And in the lawsuit, which I've told people that in 36 years now in the newspaper business, I think there are 2 documents that are the most important I've ever read. And the first is our complaint. It outlines a lot of what Paul just went through. I think it's the most important document I've ever seen in the history of my time in the business. And the other is the News Media Alliance's white paper. Paul and Bob and Clayton Fitzsimmons drew heavily from that for our lawsuit that illustrates what happened, among other things, that Google and Facebook are controlling 70% of local digital advertising revenue, 99% of every dollar in increased digital advertising. So you can see what's happening. And that really is sort of the origin of how we ended up in this case, because I texted our managing partner, Doug Reynolds, one morning and about this and said, if we don't do something, if we don't act, we can't fight just to save our company. We have to fight to save the entire industry. If we don't, we're not going to make it. And that led to a conversation with Doug and I later that same day, in which Doug said, I think we need to file an antitrust claim. And it was a short time later that we flew out and met with Bob and had the conversation about it. I think people have to very seriously look at this. And one of the things that I think, just listening to Paul right now, that I hope everybody in our business contemplates, it's not only stopping what they're doing to us, but it's realizing the opportunity to grow and be a vibrant industry again. Because, this country really needs us to do that. And from a business perspective, if we succeed, our business can go back to what it was in the sense that it was a great business. The opportunities abounded, just like I described in our increased in digital or increased in newspaper industry advertising revenues. I mean, it was a fantastic model. It worked. And I think if people would realize it, they'd see that we can be better than that. We can go from fighting for our lives to being stronger than we've ever been.
Well put, Lee. Yeah, thank you so much for that. I just want to point out, in case anyone's not noticing it, Paul is dropping answers to your questions in real time here. We had a question right at the beginning here about how can we join this fight. Email Clayton@fitzsimmonsfirm.com, and he's dropped a couple of the documents that Lee mentioned. Janelle, I want to address her question. How can small town weeklies help in this battle with the limited resources we have? Our democracy depends on this. Paul or Bob, would you like to answer that? Paul, you mentioned how people can join the case, but she's concerned about limited resources. I guess what kind of a commitment are you guys looking for from the publishers?
Yeah, this is Bob. So numbers are important, I think, and just showing that type of commitment to join in, whether big or small, makes a difference. It's obviously better to have bigger plaintiffs, so far as economics is concerned, but smaller ones also, that's important. This newspaper, the threat to the newspapers is for everybody, big and small. It doesn't make a difference. We've lost, in the last 15, 20 years, we've lost 20% of the newspapers in this country, which is just a staggering figure. And if we all don't join together, then even more devastation is going to occur in the newspaper business. But Matt, if I want to just go on. You've heard two guys, and I get to go third, which is not an easy position, obviously, in this with those two guys. But Lee is responsible with his desire and passion to push this thing. We're here because of Lee Wolverton. He's pushed this thing, and it's been his passion as a newspaper person of 35 years. He's just not gonna let unfairness go untreated. He's addressed the issue. And you heard Paul Farrell. There's no question. All you got to do is listen to Paul Farrell. There's nobody better at convincing somebody. There's nobody better with passion. I've always described Paul as the guy when you were a kid, you kind of pick sides. You said, okay, who do you want in the trenches if you got to go to war? Who's your number one pick? Well, if you get a battle in the legal courtroom, Paul Farrell's the guy. And I think everybody just kind of witnessed that already. He's even better when he prepares. He didn't prepare a whole lot for today, I think. He's amazing. But he was the architect of the opioid case. It's a complicated litigation. It has legal issues that are first impression. Put that together, tried the case for 3.5 months, and had organized the thing nationally. They came up with a national settlement, $26 billion right now. It's proposed, and it looks like it's going through. And he's the guy behind that entire endeavor, his firm. And there's a guy by the name of Paul Geller. He's probably the best antitrust lawyer in the country. At least he's known for that. He's phenomenal. And we have John Herman also from out of Atlanta. These guys are, in fact, I try to be quiet. That's why I'm number 3 here, because I don't like to speak up when those guys were talking, all of them. I just listen, and I learn so much by listening. But this is something real to the newspapers. I got involved. One of the reasons I got involved is I do a lot of defamation work. I've represented a bunch of national newspapers and journals and TV series programs and things like that. Here in West Virginia, they say a lot of bad stuff about us, so we get a lot of defamation cases around here. So anyways, we've defended those. The free press, this is the ideal case. This is the newspaper. This is what our country was founded upon. And Thomas Jefferson, said something like, a government without a newspaper or a newspaper without a government. He said every time, he says, I would choose to have the newspaper. That's the most important thing, even more important than government itself. And that's what our country was founded upon. That's why we're first, in the Constitution, freedom of the press. This is an important thing. It's something, and we need to get together. The lawsuit that we have pending, Matt, has basically 4 branches to it. There's an attorney generals that from the country have brought that. There's 2 publishers type litigations that are class actions, and then there's the case that Paul and the Geller firm and our firm have filed, and Mr. Herman's firm had filed, and that has to do exclusively right now with newspapers. We're trying to keep it isolated to newspapers also because we think that that's unique and it's different and it has some special rationale behind as to why it is a good litigation. So we're real proud. This is a fun case. We all make money. You guys have all your lawyer jokes about making money. This is a case that you really like to do just because. I don't want to say I want to do it for free, but it's something that you really enjoy and you really feel can make a difference. This is something we all can make a difference nationally on. Actually, this is the survival.
Right.
And someone asked, I think, in the process of this question about the resources and I think time commitment. And I think these guys know these are absolutely brilliant guys. They know they could call anytime, and I would be responsive to it. I think it's the most important thing I do in the course of my days, if ever they ask for anything. But I can say these guys have taken on, Bob and Paul, Rob and Geller have taken this on with no money coming for it, and they have carried. I've learned so much following the case about what's happened to us and what's going on. It has not been an extraordinary commitment. If it did get to be that, and I know as it proceeds, there could be times when more is needed. That is time extraordinarily well spent because this is a historic thing that we're engaged in here. So if ever more time was needed, I see that as something I'm happy to give. But the time that these guys have already put into this, the extraordinary effort they put into it, it's phenomenal. And from our standpoint, I mean, it's our effort compared to what they've done so far has been minimal.
Yeah, no doubt about that. I just want to answer questions as they're coming up here. And again, draw everyone's attention to the chat. Matt McMillan asked, what's the time horizon for the suit? When is this going to trial? Any idea on that or the status? What's the next step for you guys?
Yeah, this is Bob again. We're really in the initial stages still. There's a motion to dismiss that one of the judges is ruling upon. Everybody's pretty much waiting for that. We've received a bunch of records. That's called discovery. We received over a couple million records here recently. But it's going to be, these things do take some time. So you really do have to have a lot of patience. It's going to take a while. We're in the very early stages, waiting for motions to dismiss to be ruled upon. In the Attorney General's case right now, we're waiting for that.
And those are the documents that you're dropping there, Paul. Just tell us what are those links?
Yeah, so one is the congressional research puts on a hyperlinked report about the lawsuits that were filed by the FTC and the DOJ. The most recent one is an actual link to the 450-page congressional report. I actually dropped in the PowerPoint presentation. I dropped in the original complaint filed by HD Media that Lee mentioned. And I also dropped in the NMA Google white paper that Lee mentioned.
Thank you very much for that. Everyone should be getting those links now. Keep those questions coming. Really great. We appreciate your participation. I do have a couple for you here lined up. What is Google and Facebook's argument that they are not an illegal monopoly? Can you walk us through that? Are you anticipating their argument's going to be? You've laid out your argument very clearly. Any idea of how they're coming at this?
I kind of hate the answer. They may be listening. Google and Facebook kind of listening in all the time, I think, on this, and we don't want to know what we're thinking. Actually,
sure, fair enough.
They've got press releases that they put out there.
Yeah,
they think this is laissez-faire capitalism. This
right.
is doing your job well.
I think they've been really pushing the argument that the internet wants to be open and free, and they've been pushing that narrative for years. If you just look at another type of media like music or image copyright, that is something that they are enforcing on a regular basis. I literally published a video yesterday with some music on it, and I got all these notifications, of course, and it was taken down. So why isn't this happening for news, or why hasn't it happened for news? Any thoughts on that, or are you going to use music and what has happened there as part of your argument, or as part of a model for how this could work going forward?
Well, I think you guys can speak. Copyright is sort of a separate issue, isn't it?
Okay.
For the lawyers, you guys should answer that above me. But I think that is an area that we also need to explore. But like I said, Bob and Paul can correct me, but that I don't think is within the parameters of what we're dealing with right now.
I see.
Is that right, guys?
Yeah, this is Bob. That's correct. Yeah, it would complicate things, and it would change a lot of the legal strategies and things. It would just really complicate it. If we can just stick with the newspaper, which is what we're trying to do, and trying to keep that isolated, because what it is, I think things will go much smoother and much better. That's what we think right now. Now, in the future, something may change, the law may change, a ruling by a judge may change, and we may change in reaction to that. But right now, that's pretty much our position.
Right. I understood. I think it was actually Bob that said these things do move slowly, but it's nothing compared to the snail's pace of legislation being passed and the things happening in Australia. Paul dismissed that right away. That's not what you're doing here. You're looking for a much more sustainable model, much more fair payout.
Yeah, just one thing I think too, for publishers who are out there, and this is just going to be a source of frustration following this for me.
Yes.
I think there has been a lot of false hope placed in the Local Journalism Sustainability Act, which is moving through Congress. I mean, I'm for anything that helps us, so I'm not against that act. But if you look at the numbers that we've talked about in the course of this call, it tells you that's not enough. It's if you think that's going to help us, help us, sure, any help. But if you think that's going to fix this problem or prevent what we talked about before with, the continued decline in advertising revenues and where that's going to leave us, that's naive. So, I think people ought to be saying, let's do both. Let's pursue this antitrust claim that we're talking about now, and you can certainly be for the Local Journalism Sustainability Act, but don't think that's going to fix the problem. It will not.
Another question from Matt here. How many newspapers are part of the suit, and do you have a goal number of publishers? Paul, I think maybe those links are answering that question.
The short answer is that these are the links I'm giving you are discussions about the lawsuit. But I think Bob can address this best.
Right. We presently have 37 newspaper groups. We have 227 newspapers, individual newspapers, and that spans now presently 20 different states in the country.
The deal that you presented, basically no cost to the newspaper. If you lose, if you win, there's obviously a huge payout. Comment from D. Wade. There is a direct correlation between less print display advertising and paid circulation. Lee, any comment on that or any response to that?
There's a correlation, he's saying, between the decline in print advertising and circulation.
Yes.
There is absolutely a correlation between them. When the money's not there, we are forced to make decisions, and it's affected everything. Newsroom employment has fallen in newspapers from 70,000 to 30,000. So there's a drop of more than half, and there's an impact from that. When there are fewer reporters, it hinders our ability to cover communities, and it hinders the overall quality of our products. There's clearly a direct correlation, and that's why I think conversely, the other side of it is there's a direct correlation if we can find a way to rejuvenate our business model through this and what we would be able to do in coverage of our communities.
Mayumi has a question. This was one of my as well. Can you describe what your vision would be for this digital newsstand? I think it was Paul that said we would take back Google News and we would be in control of that. How do you see this playing out in terms of the broker that you mentioned that needs to be in the middle of the buyer and seller? What's the future, your perfect outcome?
Yeah, so let me see if I can address that. So there was another question earlier about the difference between a big paper and a small paper. I'm not going to say any names, but let's just pretend like there is a very large newspaper in Washington, D.C., owned by another monopolist, just fictionally. They have the ability to negotiate terms with Google and Facebook so that they don't have to hide their content behind a paywall necessarily. Because when you hide your content behind a paywall, that reduces your visibility in Google's search engine. So what we're attempting to do is not just make rules that encourage the big papers, right? We're trying to encourage the ability for small papers to address their own community. And what I have said in general is this. I got fed up at some point in time with national news, and I adopted the horse days ride rule. And what that means is that if it doesn't happen within a horse days ride of my backyard, probably not going to pay much attention to it. But what happens when my newspaper no longer has the ability to fund journalism at a horse days ride locale? And then instead, what it's simply doing is repeating the AP or repeating the larger news services. So what we want to do is we want to create an environment that rewards journalism, number one, and makes it financially possible for the digital advertising dollars to reach down into the people that want to see the news. I think it's a validation portion as well. Now, am I smart enough to figure out how to do that? No, I am not smart enough to know how to do that. What I am smart enough to do is to know who to call the smart people and to say, this is the idea. We want to capture digital advertising dollars for news content and reward those that publish true, accurate news at a local level from local dollars. Now, is this possible? Well, if Facebook can figure out that I'm talking to my wife last night about diapers and then send me diaper ads, I think they could probably figure out how to give digital advertising dollars to local digital newspapers. So we have reached out to, there's a group called Open Markets Institute, OMI. They're heavily invested in this. If anybody has seen the documentary, The Social Dilemma, you'll see that they are heavily involved in that as well. Yes, there's going to be a new marketplace. There's going to be a new paradigm. And if I have anything to do with it, then I'm going to make sure that the governing board over this new paradigm is consistent of the stakeholders and not just the New York Times, but also the dailies, the weeklies, the locals, those that need a voice. I'll give you another great example. In Puerto Rico, there's a newspaper in Puerto Rico. They've been shut out of the stateside domain from Google unless they play by Google's rules, right? Well, there's a huge diaspora of Puerto Ricans in the United States that would love to be able to have access to a digital newsstand that they can get the Puerto Rican news without having to pay for it behind a paywall. You know, take the same example for women, right? There are women-driven newspapers in New York that are focusing on women's health issues, and they're having trouble competing in the digital domain. So there's everything from looking at a regional marketplace to looking at a boutique marketplace to identifying target audiences. But there's also something to be said for just putting out good content There's something to be said for putting out something that's meaningful and important and that people have access to. That's not some blog talking about some conspiracy theory that Google continues to regurgitate, over and over and over. And so I think we have a lot of work to do to restore confidence in the media in the United States. And I think that the more we can get away from the bipolar two television stations that dominate every waiting room in America to get back to more fact-based news, the better off that our country will be.
It's a great point about the consequences. Would have been difficult to predict this 15, 20 years ago, but the news desert's leading to really misinformation because there's something that needs to fill the gap there, and it ends up being anyone.
Of course, they're playing under, they have Section 230, Google and Facebook.
Right.
They can take advantage of too, while we have to police that very closely. They're allowed to not give a damn whether something's true or false or defamatory. And
right.
We put a lot of time and effort into ensuring that what we report is right. It's hard work.
So there are certain publishers that have consolidated positions that would be very influential if they weighed in, but they're not. And some are hoping for a congressional resolution, like in Australia, and others have their own private contracts, and they're just kind of treading water. Some are diverse enough in their holdings that this isn't the primary driving revenue for them. What we need is those papers that are most impacted to do something about this. And what we're hoping for is that the more papers they get involved, the more cover you have, for a lack of a better word, to stand up and say, yes, this is wrong, fix it. Now, by hook or by crook, it's going to happen, right? HD media is not going away. HD media will have a seat at the table when these discussions are had. And so what we really need is, I don't care if you hire me, right? I don't care who you hire. I just want you to just voice what you're saying. Write an editorial. Put something in there. Talk about it. Put it out there. If you have an idea, write about it. Right? If you're seeing that your transition from print to media has increased the people reading your papers. If you had 50 people reading your print and now you have 500 reading your digital, but your advertising dollars went down and you laid off 5 journalists, write about it. Say something about it. Call your congressman. Throw an absolute shit fit. Anyway, I get worked up about this stuff.
You have to keep asking, like, we can't go on like this. I mean, there has to be an end to it. And if we don't stand up and fight for it, then the end will be written for us. So, I do care who you should call these guys. If you're interested, these are the people you should turn to. These guys understand it. They invested a lot of time and effort in it. They're brilliant guys. I just know it from being around them. You absolutely should call them, because these are the guys who are going to fix it. And these are the smartest guys out there. So we have the best team possible. So, and I would say to everybody else too, don't waste too much time worrying what the big guys are doing. I mean, I think it was a great point that Paul just made. There's a certain company out there that we won't name, but they don't give a damn about whether the industry even succeeds. They're in it, and they're going to bleed it dry, cut expenses to the greatest extent they can. They're fighting with another major company right now to try to take them over. They don't care about any. They don't care. It's not even a major source of their revenue or income. So it's not that important. So don't worry about what the big guys are doing. And some of the other big guys, well, they've become smaller for no accident. They weren't very smart along the way, and that's how they got here. The smart people understand that what we're doing is absolutely what you need to do. Stand up and fight, go after them, and try to make a difference. If you stand by and wait for Congress to fix it or for things just to fix themselves, then it's not a very bright way of looking at it.
I just got to echo all the comments here. I've seen it multiple times now. Just seeing this passion from you three is just very inspiring. I think you've piqued a lot of interest today. I definitely want to answer this. We've seen it a couple times. You showed us that graph earlier of the drop off in advertising revenue, Paul, and then you showed how we want to fill that gap. 3x, actually, the difference in what was lost since around 2005, I think it was. Can you put a number on that? Is there a number that you've calculated? I'm just curious.
Now, when you look at it from the industry standpoint, Congress has put the number at 37 billion.
Okay. So that's basically what you're suing them for.
Times three.
Yeah, just so you realize the damages are actual damages in the past. That's one thing we're looking for.
Sure.
There's also a thing called treble damages. You triple it, you get a multiplier.
Right.
On top of that. So if the damages are $100, you get $300 under the particular act. Plus attorney fees is also being sought, and that's a yes or a no, depending on what it is. But we shouldn't be driven just by everybody's going to get some bag of money. That's people really don't like that. It's a money grab. There's a principle behind this too, and I know I'm a lawyer and maybe a salesman and stuff. I'm trying to be. You got to have some passion. You got to believe what you're doing. You guys either believe in what you're doing or give it up and go get yourself a good job. If you love what you do, then you don't have to worry about the money. So this thing needs to be brought, and we need to have a remedy. Mostly going forward, how is everybody going to be treated?
Mm-hmm.
And that's key,
resetting the business model. To me, I'm an editor, so I work for a living. I'm not going to see any of this money. But I'm concerned about the resetting of the business model so that we can have the chance to truly be competitive again and grow our business. From my perspective as a journalist, that means I can get more reporters and we can do more important work. That, to me, that is the most important part of this case. If we come out on the other side of it, the business model's reset, we have the chance to be truly competitive and vibrant, and that is what success looks like to me.
Making a sustainable model, yes, not depending on government handouts. A lot of different themes here, and it all makes sense what you guys are saying. And Lee, I just want to highlight what you said again, that 5-year timeline. I think we've been saying that this is a problem for years, but I mean, that is a sobering fact. It's going to be at 0 if the current trends continue. And there's really no indication that it's not going to continue.
I would encourage everyone to go to the Pew Research Center. Mm-hmm. We've drawn a lot of data from there. The News Media Alliance has. They provide the most comprehensive data on the industry. Go there, just Google Pew Research, Google Pew Research Center, newspaper advertising revenues, and scrutinize it. I mean, really look at those numbers, and that will tell you what's happening, and you can't deny where the trends are going and where they'll lead. So I would encourage everyone to go there and look at it.
Okay, any last minute questions from our attendees or any last comments from our panelists before we wrap up this webinar?
Matt, I just want to thank you on behalf of Paul and Lee also. How efficient you guys did this thing, and the questions were really on spot. It was nice to have a forum with people interested in asking great questions. So pretty neat. I liked it. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Bob. I couldn't have done it without you guys. Thank you so much. Paul, again, that overview was just so helpful. You literally answered all the questions I had for you. And then we had some wonderful ones from our attendees. So we'll wrap it up here. We do have a link. Please check it out before you leave from Paul for the Pew Research page. Oh, we have a question, one more from Deborah. Have you reached out to any of the newspaper associations, the state and national associations? I mentioned them earlier. They helped us promote this event. Have you guys approached them at all to try to recruit more publishers?
Well, so we're not really into recruiting. That's not, it's not that
wrong term.
Parlance that we went to.
We have spoken with the news. I mean, as we've talked to the News Media Alliance and America's newspapers and explained what we're doing.
Okay.
So yeah, our guys have not recruited at all, but we've spoken and explained what we're about, what we're doing. Personally, I encourage everybody to contact these guys. I think everybody should do it. I'm allowed to. I think everyone should do it. The News Media Alliance has been tremendously helpful. I think personally, David Shavern is the best at his position that I've seen in all my years in the business. Danielle Coffey is their legal counsel. She's extremely bright. And we've had good talks with America's newspapers. And of course, the West Virginia Press Association is aware of what we're doing. But it is ultimately an individual decision, for publishers and people and, CEOs and those types to make those decisions.
Right.
So we've talked to a lot of people, and anybody who knows me has heard of it.
Right. Yeah, I would definitely suggest anyone that's interested in learning more, check out David, the CEO of the News Media Alliance. I mean, really, he's very well spoken. He's got a ton of content out there. There's a bunch of editor and publisher interviews with him where he just lays out everything that he's been doing in such a clear way. You just listen to him, again, and a very inspiring speaker.
And publisher has a tab too that's on their site that they're following.
Antitrust, right? Editor and publisher site.
Question real quick about recruiting. The lawyers get a really bad rap sometimes, and we bring it on ourselves when we self-promote and advertise. Bob Fitzsimmons has been a long advocate of just be a damn good lawyer and you'll get the clients. So what we're being very focused on is not going out and waving the flag of hire us, hire us, hire us. What we're doing is we're good lawyers. We do good work, and hopefully the message gets repeated, and then we organically will meet clients.
I think the state and press associations are very good at getting this information out there, just in my experience. So I hope you guys continue to partner up with them there. I think that we've hit most of our questions. Just a statement from Janelle: the more we stand in unity, the better this lawsuit will go. Absolutely. I mean, that really, if you think about it this way, like they are unified as a multi-billion-dollar global corporation. We've been separated. There's no real natural unity happening. So we have to make it happen through cases like this. Okay, I think that's all the questions that we have. We still have a lot of people on with us, but unless there's any last comments, I think we'll wrap it up here. And again, thank you, Paul, Bob, and Lee, for your time. I really appreciate you joining us and sharing your status with this case. It's very interesting. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
And good luck.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
Thanks a lot, Bob.
Thanks,
You too.
Tom.
Take care, Lee.